All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. I call the January 19th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting to order. The time is now 6:01. The main purposes of tonight's meeting are a briefing on the Water Services Plan, a public hearing on the 2021 Housekeeping Code amendments, and a study session on the status of the 2022 Planning Docket. A couple of quick items about the meeting. As with our previous meetings, the commissioners and staff are participating via Zoom tonight. During the Zoom meeting, the chat and question functions are restricted for compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. That time is for comments on issues not related to tonight's agenda. Please limit these comments to 3 minutes or less. Under Governor Inslee's Proclamation 2028 regarding open public meetings, this meeting is being held remotely. Public comment will be allowed both in writing and orally. The Imagine Bothell notice, the city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. People wishing to comment were instructed to notify staff or provide written comments by 3 p.m. today. The video of this meeting will be streamed live, as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. The call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they're referencing so everyone can follow along. Those who provided advance notice are able to make comments under the audience comment portion of the meeting. Email was also encouraged and will be acknowledged. At this point of the meeting, let's take a quick moment to acknowledge the attendance of commissioners and do a quick sound check. Chair Kiernan is away, excused and absent. Commissioner Olson.
Commissioner Dodd here.
Oh my gosh, sorry. Commissioner Westerbeck.
Here.
Commissioner Robson.
Here.
And Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
Great. In addition, Community Development Director Michael Cotterman and Senior Planners Dave Boyd and Nathan Lamb are in attendance. And we also welcome Boyd Benson, Public Works Utilities and Development Division Manager. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking and mute your microphone when not speaking. If you're also streaming the live video feed, please turn down the sound as there is a delay. For commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I'll be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you want to speak, please indicate by either getting my attention or putting up the raise hand function on Zoom. I'll call you as I see you. This is going to avoid problems of 2 people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion or second a motion, or participate in debate. Please mute your microphone when not speaking. The first item on today's agenda is public comment. In keeping with the Proclamation 2028 regarding public gatherings, as well as the Open Public Meetings Act, the city has accepted visitor comment in writing, as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record. This time is for items that are not on tonight's agenda. Director Cotterman, were there any comments received tonight?
No, Mr. Chair, there were no comments received, not before the 3 o'clock. We did receive some additional comments from Vivian Peterson, who spoke last time. Those were directed more at staff, but we'll be happy to forward those on to the commission for your future reference. They were regarding landscaping. I also have 2 people in the attendee room. I've already checked with Mala, and he indicated he did not need to speak at this time. And I believe he's also, if he does speak, would want to speak later on one of the docket items. I also have Dave Drews, and I believe Mr. Drews is also interested in the docket item. Dave, are you here to talk about a docket item later on? Dave, can you unmute?
Yes.
Are you here to talk about a docket item later this evening?
No, I'm just listening into the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have no one then to speak under public comment.
Okay, great.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
We'll move on to the approval of minutes. We have before us the meeting minutes from, wow, December 15th, 2021, last year. Is there a motion to approve? Commissioner Robson, great. And is that a second, Commissioner Dodd? Great. Is there any discussion on the meeting minutes? Any discussion? Any discussion? All right, with that, we have approved or I guess, is there, all those in favor of approval of the minutes, raise your hand. Seeing unanimous consent, the minutes from December 15th are approved. Let's move on to the next item. It's new business, the water service plan briefing. I believe we have a presentation. Boyd Benson.
Yes, good evening, Chairperson and members of the Planning Commission. I have just a few slides to share with you. It's more of an overview about the water utility and the water system plan update, and then I'd be pleased to answer any questions you have. So I will try to share my screen. Can someone please verify that they can see my screen?
We can.
Outstanding, thank you. So just a quick overview. Jurisdictions, both utility districts and city jurisdictions that have water utilities must complete periodic updates to the water system plan. The water system plan is a document that demonstrates compliance with drinking water rules. It includes operation and maintenance and planning documents for a 10 and 20-year horizon with respect to both growth within the city and related growth within the water system. We last updated our plan in 2012. The update was actually due 6 years later in 2018. We started the process in 2018, 2019, and with COVID, it's just taken a bit longer to get this process through. This does not impact our water utility. If we weren't actively updating our plan, we would be answering questions from DOH, the Department of Health, but that's not the case for us here. So the ultimate goal is to get this plan completed, get it through City Council, get it through SEPA permitting or review, and then get it through the Department of Health for any comments and corrections. We consider this a minor update of the plan. You'll see if you have looked at the document, it's quite extensive. It's not substantially different than the 2012 plan. The regulations have not changed much. The main difference between this plan and previous plans are the capital improvement project list. These are the projects we have determined must be completed to accommodate growth and also to serve existing customers. So what we have tonight is just to inform Planning Commission and answer questions or concerns about the plan. And once we complete that, we will finish with our SEPA review, and we'll be bringing this to the City Council for consideration prior to submittal to the Department of Health. So a quick water utility overview, the city of Bothell. The city utility serves basically the King County portion of the city. The Snohomish County portion of the city is served by Alderwood Water and Wastewater District. And then the eastern portion is Woodinville Water District, just a portion of the city area. And then portions of the western and southern service or city boundaries are served by the North Shore Utility District. And you can see on this map, the retail service area, those are the yellow rectangle is just an approximate outline of our service area, but it's a defined area where we are obligated to serve and where others may not serve within our area without agreements. So our goal is to provide safe, reliable water at adequate pressures and flows to maintain service to our customers. Just a few quick facts. We're a medium-sized water district or water utility. So we have about 120 miles of water main, 3 large reservoirs you may be familiar with. And then what people don't really pay attention to, since it's not very visible, but about 3,000 valves and a little over 1,000 hydrants. So there's quite a bit of infrastructure that must be maintained on a day-to-day basis. Our staffing within the utility is relatively small. For operations, those are the folks that do work day to day. There's a total of 12 staff to serve both water and sewer utilities. So it's about 6 dedicated staff for water. We also have utility billing staff that help process billing and answer customer questions. And then we have the planning and engineering side of the house. And that's some of my duties and some of my peers' duties to make sure that we're looking in the future to make certain that we can provide adequate service. Just little things that aren't always seen, but we're required to complete daily testing for water quality, chlorine residual, and chloroform content. We have a pretty expansive system control and data acquisition SCADA system that monitors water tank levels. It monitors about 70 control valves that regulate pressure within the systems within different zones depending on the elevation of the zones. And then we just have our daily, weekly maintenance and repairs when we have issues with our system. So brief overview of the water system plan contents. The growth, we look at existing conditions and future conditions at a 20-year horizon. And that's based on our adopted zoning maps and our growth projections through the community development department. So the first chapter is water system description. It describes our sources and our rights to those sources. Our planning data, it describes what we have for current populations and uses and what we forecast for populations. Our system analyses, this is how does everything work together? So the pressure zones, how do they interact, the pump stations, the reservoirs? The hydraulic analysis is how we understand, do we have adequate pressure for fire flow at all nodes within the system? And if not, how do we fix those issues? Water use efficiency program. This is something that's through the state and WAC, and we have goals to make sure that we are not outstretching our water supply capabilities. So we're part of the city of Bothell is part of the water saving partnership. They set goals for pretty much keeping our current use or our future use to current use. And that means that as over time, we'll see decreases in per capita consumption. And I just have a little table at the end of the slide to show you that. Operation maintenance programs. This is how we make sure that we're completing the items that we must to ensure water quality and good flow. And then, like I said, the major update on this plan is the capital improvement program. So what this does is look at a 20-year horizon for growth, a 20-year project list to address that growth, but also looks at other issues and, I guess, system improvements that we'd like to address. The city has a bit of asbestos cement water main left within the system. And it's not a health hazard. It just happens to be a type of pipe that becomes soft over time. So we're replacing that. We're looking now when we install water main to use restrained joints. So if the earth shakes, the water pipes do not separate. So those type of projects are within the CIP. And on the next slide, I'll walk through those really briefly. And the last part is a fiscal analysis. We look at our utility budgets, fiscal health, quarterly, annually, and as part of the biennial budget. What we look at within this water system plan is just more of a general look at the fiscal viability over the 20-year period. It's more of a planning level understanding where we sit right now. And currently we are collecting less revenue than the expenses we program for that 20-year period. So what we look to do is to optimize and find opportunities to make projects as cheap as possible. And then the appendices, which really have the guts of quite a bit of the plan. It's our coliform monitoring plan. It's all the plans and processes and agreements that make sure that our water system continues strong. So I wanted to quickly go over the relationship of the water system plan with other processes. So the water system plan is a utility plan, but it is also seen as a planning level document, and it informs a comprehensive plan. So we do work with community development department to verify that the growth estimates are consistent to zoning and what's expected for their estimates. We file a SEPA checklist to make sure that we're looking at all the items we should be when we consider how this plan relates to the environment. And that's not just the natural environment, but that's all all built environments, transportation, all of these plans. And then once again, the capital facilities plan is the project list that we develop informs a capital facilities plan. And this is a plan that's updated every 2 years to kind of set the map for how the city will complete transportation projects and utility projects. And that's something that will be starting up within the next few months, the next update. And then more importantly is that, well, they're all important, but the biennial budgets and the utility budget. And once again, this all informs a comprehensive plan. We need to make sure that when community development and policy decision makers determine how growth should occur within the city of Bothell, that we can make sure that the water system can accommodate that growth. And I think you've seen this in your packet, but it's just a snapshot of our 10-year capital improvement plan. The reason I wanted to share this is many of these projects are projects to replace, like I mentioned, aging asbestos cement mains that are within areas where we're completing transportation improvement projects. So we're trying to, like I said, we're trying to find efficiencies and optimize our dollars. So if we'll be deconstructing a road for transportation improvements, that's a great time to take care of water. You'll see some larger projects as well. The Bloomberg Reservoir Recoating Improvement Project and Maywood Hills Reservoir Replacement. So these are much larger projects. We typically look for grants and opportunities, loans to fund these projects. And then once again, when you see items like Bothell Way widening or street overlay, this just means we plan to take care of older water main and much needed improvements prior to completing projects that would make it more expensive to make those improvements in the future. And that's pretty much it for the overview. I wanted to share some interesting, I think they're interesting. Once again, not everyone understands that water and sewer is probably the most interesting thing in the city of Bothell, just because you don't see it, it's underground, but every time you turn on your faucet or flush your toilet, it works. So that makes us very happy. So we have about 4,700 service connections. For water purchases for 2021, it was 500 million gallons of water. Our majority of our source comes from Seattle Public Utilities and the Tolt Reservoir. I just think that's a cool number. One item that's been of interest is how has COVID-19 pandemic impact water use and revenue? And it has made an impact. So I just summarized a few things on those bullets. Our 2019 and 2020 revenue is lower than what we would have expected to see, or 2020 was lower than what we'd expect to see based on 2019. 2021 revenue is actually up a bit. So that means we're seeing use patterns come back to normal. We have a lot of folks telecommuting and commercial businesses shutting down a bit during the early stages of the pandemic. So we saw an increase in residential consumption and a decrease in commercial. We're only seeing a slight increase in pass-through accounts, which is very good. So our utility billing department works very closely with residents in our community that have challenges paying their water bill. So we're pretty keen on making sure that we can those issues. And then once again, I mentioned that we have water use efficiency goals. And I think this little table here within the plan is really interesting. In 2010, it was about 61 gallons per person per day of consumption. And 2019, it was down to about 50. So what that means is as newer homes are built with low flow toilets and showers and the rest, and folks swap out those items as they do remodels and the rest, you're seeing an overall decrease in per capita consumption, which is great. That means we won't have as large of a stress for our water supply. And another question we typically ask are how do our rates within the city of Bothell compare to other cities? The chart on the right are 25 cities that are served by SPU water supply. We're right in the middle. We used to be near the bottom, which you could say is good for the consumer, but you could also say that we weren't collecting enough revenue to make sure we needed to do the improvements that are required to make sure the water system is strong. So we're pretty pleased that we are in the middle of the pack and not up near the top, as some of the cities you can see. I think that's all I have to share with you today. And if I can answer any questions, I'd be pleased to do so.
Great. Thank you for your presentation. Commissioner Dodd.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation, Boyd. It was really interesting. So I'm one of the Snohomish County part of the city residents, so we're on Alderwood water. And just sort of as a point of curiosity, are there ever any discussions, or is it even logistically possible to lump in the people who are on like Alderwood, North Shore, Woodinville water and like put that all into the city system? So we're all, sorry about the dog. So we're all sort of on the same system?
It's a really good question. And it's something the city's looked at in the past. We have taken small areas where it made sense at the county line because we could better serve those customers with pressure and flow. But those retail service areas I described to you, that actually is, those borders are set pretty well. They're kind of like city limits. And so to change those, it's very challenging to do so. So unless Alderwood chose to disband, which they probably will never do so, then no, it's really hard to lump together. I will say though, you bring up a good question, Planning Commissioner Dodd. When Alderwood does their update, they must also use the gross estimates from the city. I mean, because they have to do the same exercise. It's slightly different because they're a district, but they also have to understand how they can serve the north part of the city. So it is looked at. It's just very challenging to mix it together.
Yeah, it's interesting to me just too, because, and this is a little colloquial, but sometimes it feels like we don't have a lot of a voice because we're just a tiny little part of Alderwood. So the benefit of being in a municipality is sort of lost there with our water stuff. Like I've lived in 2 homes now in this part of the city that don't have sewer, and Alderwood is not going to expand sewer unless a developer comes in and pays for it. So it's kind of a bummer at times, but there could be bummers no matter what. You never know. So thank you.
Yeah, and just one thing to add to that, you're a citizen of Bothell and Public Works serves Bothell. So if citizens ever have questions that are within the Alderwood service area, we take those serious. If we're asked those questions, we'll follow up with Alderwood. We have standing meetings with them. We try to work as closely as possible with them. So if you ever hear questions or have questions, please bring them up.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Commissioner Westerbeck, and then I saw Commissioner Gustafson has a question as well.
Right. Can you hear me okay? Thank you, Mr. Boyd. I'm curious about Commissioner Dodd's question. The history of that, did we keep, or did we end up as the sort of city of Bothell water district, because that was like the original core of the city? And then those other areas that were annexed in, or they were unincorporated King County, or were sort of parceled off or claimed by those other water districts? Is that roughly the history of it? Is that kind of how it happened? And now that they've just kind of held on to those areas?
I might lean on Dave Boyd on this, but what I will say is you have that essentially correct. A large portion of our city within Snohomish County was annexed in, and those water systems were there at the time, and those retail service area boundaries were set. So I don't have the history on how that actually occurred, but that's typically how these
Makes sense.
boundaries are set. Yeah.
I was just curious. Interesting to me. That's first I've heard that they sort of want to, I guess they make money off of it. So they want to claim it and keep it, and they don't want to relinquish it, but that's very interesting. So thank you for the information. It's really interesting.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Gustafson here. I think I'm sharing the curiosity of Commissioner Dodd and Westerbeck about how exactly a switch would happen if it could happen. There was some information about that service area potentially switching over to Alderwood. And I'm curious, Mr. Benson, how would that work? What is it physically like to switch to a different water system? Do you just route it through the intertie, or is it going to require a lot more of a physical process?
That's a really good question, Planning Commissioner. It's for the mechanics. It really is. Do you have the pressure to serve those areas? Are they higher elevation than what we can serve? Our reservoirs are not as high in elevation as Alderwood. And do you have the adequate circulation to make sure that the water flows and is refreshed and you have good water quality? So that's the mechanics of it. But once again, the more regulatory part is you just can't grab someone's service area. It's set at that boundary. So it really would be Alderwood couldn't serve a new development right on our boundary. They'd ask us to serve it. And we'd say, okay, can we serve it? And we've done that in the past. But yeah, it would, for for folks within the Alderwood service area to say, I'd like to be part of the city's service area, it just really wouldn't be a reality, like I said, unless for some reason Alderwood disbanded, and that's very unlikely. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Benson. I think you answered my question about what it would physically be like to switch. I'm curious though, because I read in the packet that it looks like Alderwood might take over more of the actual Bothell service area instead of the other way around. Is that still a possibility?
No. And,
Okay.
and I'll double check that. Just there's some pretty loose language within the executive summary. And if you got that impression, I'll double check. But no.
Okay.
We are working with Alderwood to get an intertie to provide extra fire flow at the northeast corner of our city. So you may have read that, and that's actually very exciting for us because we have low pressure there, and if the hydrant's open, that type of intertie would allow higher pressure water to come from Alderwood. So maybe that was the issue you're thinking.
Okay. Yes, that might have been it. Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions from commissioners? I have one quick question to finish it off. I'm wondering about usage from industrial areas of our city. We always hear about how Bothell is a biotech center, and the North Creek neighborhood has a lot of industrial uses. I'm wondering how much, just roughly, is it a lot more, obviously probably a lot more residential, but is it like substantial? Is the amount of industrial water usage substantial, or?
I actually have the pie charts that I was going to share in case those questions came up, but it's not substantial. The majority of ours is residential. And if I could just, this is actually really interesting to me. So, Chair, may I please share something real briefly again?
Of course.
I say that it's. Oh. Well, I'll tell you I had it up and now it's not. So now it's the white screen. Yeah. That is very disappointing. So I can't share, but what I'll do is I'll snip that out and I'll send it to Mr. Lamb, and he can share that. If that's okay.
That'd be great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for the presentation. Because this is a briefing, there's no action involved from Planning Commission. So we'll keep an eye out for these improvements and future study sessions and so forth. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for your time and your good questions.
Great. The next item on our agenda tonight is a public hearing for the 2021 Housekeeping Code Amendments, I think. And so I believe this is my first time chairing. So I'm wondering if we need to open up the public hearing for it, or if we have a presentation to begin with first.
I think you can just open the public hearing, Mr. Chair. Just announce that it's open, and then we can do the staff presentation. And then if there's anyone to speak, we'll do that after any clarifying questions from the commission.
Great. All right. Well, the public hearing is open for the 2021 Housekeeping Code Amendments. And let's kick it off with the staff presentation.
Okay, that's me. So let me pull this up. Share. And, okay, so you should see my presentation. Can I just get a thumbs up? Okay, good. Okay, so yeah, nice to be back in front of y'all and see everyone again. Happy New Year. I hope you enjoyed your break. And we are following up with our public hearing from the study session for the 2021 Housekeeping Code Amendments that we brought you early December of last year to have a public hearing like we said we would do. And These are the 2021 amendments, not to be confused with the 2022 housekeeping code amendments, which we'll talk a little bit about more on the for the docket discussion. The format of the presentation is the same. A lot of this is the same information that you've seen, with a couple adjustments based on some of your feedback and conversations with other city staff and city council. And so I'll go ahead and point out those highlights, but I think we can move pretty quickly through this tonight. So this should all look familiar. So just to recap, these were initiated from our 2021 docket. I believe we had 12 items on the docket, and we ultimately decided to defer 4 of those items and expunge 1 of those items. Go ahead and minimize that so I can see. So the only one that we deferred that I'd like to point out is the one in the middle, reviewing minimum 800 square foot floor area requirements in Lower Maywood's special district, which may prohibit small ADUs. We're probably going to speak about that a little bit more on the docket portion later, as this housekeeping amendment sort of brought up some other issues and has expanded into probably a separate code amendment item to make sure we're complying with recent housing legislation. So we can talk a little bit about that more later. And so ultimately we ended up with keeping 5 housekeeping amendments from the docket. We are scratching 1 off the list. So there is 1 that you previously would have heard at the study session that's not moving forward. It's matching the SEPA exemption to new short plat threshold. So we went from, if y'all will recall, we went from allowing 4 to 9 for our short plats process. I'm having trouble recalling exactly how to word that, but y'all would have worked on that, and we just needed to update some of the language in our code. And unfortunately, we forgot that there's like a noticing requirement that our council pointed out. And so we are going to defer that to 2022 as well and bring that back in front of you, but that should be ready to go once we meet the proper noticing requirements. And also, just by the very nature of housekeeping amendments, more amendments came up, particularly with our development review staff that implements a lot of our code on a daily basis. And so we've added these other items to the 2021 docket. And so you should be familiar with all of these. Nothing new here. The one thing to point out on this slide is that number 5, removing extraneous language in 2.52085 for quasi judicial public hearings. We wanted to just continue to carry that forward and show you for reference, although it's not in your purview for code amendments, but everything else, all the other items tonight are. Okay, and ultimately these are the affected titles that we're talking about tonight, and Title II, Administration and Personnel, Title 11, Administration of Development Rights, Title 12, Zoning, and Title 14, Environment. And for our viewers and for review, when we look at these, and if, as you would have seen in the packet, new language that staff is proposing is shown as underlined, deleted language is strike through, and then we've got skipped sections that are notated with 3 asterisks, and then all other provisions would remain unchanged and in full force. Okay, so for the first item, this is that Title II amendment that's not really in your purview, but it does directly impact sort of your role at the city. When we first brought this amendment to you at the study session, this is how it looked. There were 2 sections, A and B, and we propose striking the first section A, but with further deliberation with our deputy city attorney, we've actually changed it to recommending to strike this entire section. It's just more antiquated language rather than extraneous at this point. It speaks to the Planning Commission in a quasi-judicial public hearing role, and that's just not the way we operate anymore. And so we are recommending to remove all of that language. The second item here, you'll recall, is removing sort of these redundant definitions that we had in our code that were a little bit difficult to implement because our code references similar but different definitions, which were coverage building, coverage hard surface, and hard surface. And again, as you'll recall, we're going to change all of those references to those three definitions to impervious surface. This is just more consistent with development review when we're coordinating with Public Works, for example, and how it's done in our region as well. And then so we've got a bunch of references in Title 12. We just need to go strike and update as well. So that's what that one is. This one is just simply reformatting this table in Title 11, which is our land use actions by type table. It also removes temporary occupancy permits for commercial and multifamily buildings. Those don't exist anymore. And any references to these sort of like phased occupancy permits would be in Title 20. And so we're striking those. And then on the bottom right, with the asterisk that's highlighted that we're striking, that is, it's sort of some similar language to the First Amendment in Title 2 that we just looked at. And it's no longer relevant for this Planning Commission. Okay, the next item is clarifying wireless communication facility permit. When permits are required for wireless communication facilities, there wasn't any feedback on this item. It's very straightforward. It's just helps our development review staff. And I do have did set aside some time for a break here. So if anybody, I'll expand my screen here. And if anybody has a question, I'm happy to answer before we continue on. Okay, we'll go ahead and minimize again and keep going. The next item is amending 12.14.070 setback requirements for HVAC and similar pad mounted equipment. Based on your feedback at the study session, we are just making this piecemeal sort of amendment this time, but we did hear your concerns and take them into consideration. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit in a little bit when we talk about the docket, since this is sort of expanded into not really a housekeeping amendment, but more of a comprehensive sweep at our code with anything that has to do with modern HVAC equipment and the placement and the screening that's required in our code currently. So for now, this is just this piecemeal approach that we're taking. The next item is has to do with exterior lighting in the right-of-way in the city. This one was very straightforward too. Commissioner Curd, I did follow up on a question that you had. I believe you wanted to know if the festive lighting that goes up sort of downtown and in the city during the holidays is included in the exemptions, and it is. I think it's listed as number 4 in this code section, and it says temporary lighting installed for holidays and celebrations is exempt, provided that individual lamps are 10 watts or less. And so hopefully that answers your question, and I'll move on to the next item. Again, very straightforward. This has to do with permanent off-premises, non-commercial signs. We're just striking Director of Public Improvements and changing it to Community Development. Continue to fly through these, amending 12.44.020 for the Shelton View sub-area regulations. There is some zones references in that sub-area that were changed. I believe this one was regarding when the Canyon Park sub-area plan was adopted. There were some zoning changes in this sub-area too that were affected. And so we are, we are striking those zones that are no longer relevant. And so that's just a simple update to that code section for that sub area. And I do have another slide for another break to see if there are any questions. I'll scroll through here.
I've got a quick question, and I don't think I see anybody else. Regarding the last slide that you showed, striking these zoning designations from this chapter wouldn't necessarily restrict this type of zoning to occur in the sub area at a later time should the zoning change. Is that correct? It's just specific to this north end of the sub area?
I think that's right. Yeah, and I'm going to lead on Dave Senior Planner Dave Boyd, because he's got his hand up. So I'm going to defer to him to shed some, give you some insight on that.
Yeah, that's correct. That this wouldn't preclude any rezones that would include those designations. And actually, it's not a zoning change. It's just a reflection that particular zone that used to be in the Shelton View sub area in 2015 got moved into the Canyon Park sub area, and we just missed this reference here. So this is just bringing it in line with what was done in 2015.
Great. Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, I'm going to scroll through here one more time. Don't see any hands up. Okay, so I'll go back to it. Just a few items left here. So this is Title 12, amending 12.14.030 to remove circular references and provide guidance for development in parts of the Canyon Park sub area that are outside of the regional growth center. I think sort of a similar idea as the last item. When that zoning was updated, there were some revisions that needed to be made, and I think that's what this is doing. And I'll let Dave jump in again, but I think the major thing to point out about this amendment is this language that you see at the bottom here in zones where multiple designations, zone designations exist, the commercial development regulations and 12.14.040 shall apply. So I think there was some confusion about which regulations would be in effect, and so this is just clarifying that for future reference. Okay, the next item is one item that we did have some feedback from you all, so we'll spend a little bit more time talking about that. It's requirements for exemptions and in lieu fees for the provision of designated outdoor space in the downtown sub area. So where the Planning Commission intended to exempt projects that would be required to provide outdoor space which was under 1,000 square feet, I believe, would be exempt. And so when this code was being implemented in development review on a few different applications, it became clear that we needed to provide some more guidance. And so we added this table that sort of clarifies the intent of the Planning Commission and helps our development review staff be able to enforce this code. And I would like to point out that we did have one error in your packet. So this is what the table would have looked like in your packet for this evening. And it's what we carried over from the study session. And I just did not get the updates into your packet. And so this is what the table should have looked like. All of the revisions are in red. And so we will be asking the Planning Commission to, when you make a recommendation later, to do so with staff's recommended amendments to the code amendments. So apologies about that, but based on your feedback, I think you all wanted the table to be a little bit clearer, as it was a bit ambiguous, and so that's what we've done here. Essentially, we have just striked but in the applicability column. We've added the use of in lieu fee column. We've essentially kept the same language in the first box under applicability for less than 1,000 square feet projects. We've just put parentheses around that language to just clarify further. And moving it down in the applicability boxes, you see required and that previous language strike, but it's just simply moved into the use of in lieu fee column. And then we have some added language for the minimum size. There's a provision for projects less than 1,000 square feet that they can transfer property outside of that particular project per subsection 4 in this code section. And Dave, there's another part to this, and I'll attempt to go over the intent of these updates. And if I miss anything, I'll let Dave jump in. 6 has stayed the same. And you should have seen these amendments in the packet. This did make it in, whereas the table didn't. And so we've just added this language in red. Before it said fee in lieu payments shall be based on the assessed value at the time of the application for the land use permit. I think there was a little bit of ambiguity, and we had some discussion with our deputy city attorney, and in consultation with him, we added this additional language. So fee in lieu payments are intended to approximate the cost of providing public space on site and shall be based on the assessed value at the time of the application for the land use permit, plus a unit cost for developing public space that may be adjusted over time based on actual construction costs. And that's more of an administrative amendment to help staff with this section of the code. And then number 8, the same idea, full payment of all in lieu fees would be required prior to issuance of the grading permit, or if no grading permit is involved prior to issuance of the building permit. So it just helps us out administratively. And I'm going to expand my box here. Dave, I'm going to go to the next item unless there was anything I missed. Oh, I see Commissioner Gustafson has a question.
Thank you, Senior Planner Lamb, and thank you for putting the visual aids in the presentation. It does help. I wanted to thank the staff for making 2 changes. One is the language that approximates the usage of the public space over time, and I think Chair Kiernan would be really happy to see that in there. And the other thing that I really appreciate is that table that shows how the requirements kind of stack onto each other. I think originally it was really tricky to figure out who would have to provide what, and it might have had some unintended consequences. And this is really easy to see how size translates into requirements.
Thank you. And I will continue on to the next item, which is second to last, or actually this is the last item, which is just removing vestigial language in section 14.04.140 for reasonable use applications. This is something that was brought to our attention again by our development review staff. It's just no longer relevant, and we are recommending to strike it. And with that, we have our next steps, and what we're asking of the Planning Commission tonight is to move to forward your recommendation to City Council to adopt these 2021 housekeeping code amendments with the amendments recommended by staff that I mentioned. And then after that, we would be taking these to City Council February 15th for their approval. And then we would begin preparing the 2022 housekeeping amendments. And we do have just about as many of those to date for 2022 as we had for 2021. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here.
Thank you for the presentation. Really great. We had some time to ask some clarifying questions, but at this time, I think I'm going to open it up one more time for some clarifying questions, and then we will entertain public comment on the item, and I think that's how we'll do this. So does anybody have any clarifying questions on anything that was in the presentation? All right. Director Cotterman, we have someone in the attendees room, and I just wanted to make sure that they had an opportunity to speak if this is the item that they wanted to.
So Mala, if you'd like to speak, could you please raise your virtual hand and we'll bring you in. Okay. Let me see if I can bring you in as a panelist. Was having mixed luck with that earlier tonight.
What do you mean by panelist? I don't know which one I have to join.
Well, we'd be able to see you then, but we can hear you. So, so if you'd like to speak, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
No, basically, I don't. I'm talking about that the Nike Hill rezoning. So, is there any way to get it this year? That's my only one question. That's it.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat your question?
Is there any way to get it this year? The Nike Hill rezoning.
Your item is coming up a little later in the docket, and so we'll ask you to speak at that point. How's that?
Okay, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. I don't see any other attendees in the attendee room. Did we receive any public comment that wasn't already forwarded to us? Okay. At this time, I think we entertain a motion to close the public hearing on this issue. And I see Commissioner Dodd.
Thanks, Chair. I move to close the public hearing.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Commissioner Westerbeck seconds. Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? All right. All those in favor of closing the public hearing, raise your hand. And everyone in attendance is unanimous. We close the public hearing. And now's the time for deliberations on the items near the end of the packet. specifically about Planning Commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations. This is beginning on page 28. And so we go through the items, the history, the geographic location that these apply to, and then the proposed actions. So I guess at this time, if there are any considerations that need to be made that aren't necessarily clarifying, this would be the time to make them. And I don't see any questions or clarifications, but I have one. I think regarding the first item, even though the Planning Commission doesn't necessarily have deliberations over these, I think that it might be worth it to recommend to City Council that all mention of quasi-judicial hearings, public hearings, as part of the purview of Planning Commission would be removed from our scope. And there is another item in the municipal code in Title II, Chapter 52, Section 020, specifically the third and fourth sentences that do mention engaging a temporary member of the Planning Commission to conduct quasi-judicial public hearings. I don't think that's really applicable if Planning Commission itself does not perform quasi-judicial public hearings. And so I think that should be added probably to our recommendation. It's relatively minor and we don't have any say over it. So yeah, Director Cotterman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could, because we're so far along in the 21 housekeeping amendments, I'm not sure if we can add anything at this point without having to go back and redo some steps. So I would suggest, I appreciate you catching that. That's exactly the kind of thing that we try to pick up in these housekeeping amendments. So if I could, I would suggest that we add that to the 22 housekeeping amendment list.
Yeah, that's probably wise. Okay. Sorry for not catching it earlier. And
no, thanks for catching it. Obviously, we missed it. So
okay. So I guess we've already gone through all the items and I've asked a couple times, if there is anything, please get my attention. But I think we can probably read the conclusions 1 through 3. And then if we're all in agreement on these conclusions, we can authorize Chair Kiernan to sign and continue on in this process. So I'm just going to, for clarity's sake, read the 3 conclusions. This is on page 32 and 33 of the packet. The conclusions say, number 1, the potential code amendments have been drafted, noticed, reviewed by the public, and considered by the Planning Commission in accordance with the applicable laws of the state of Washington and the city of Bothell. Number 2, the potential code amendments are necessary to provide clarification, remove confusing and cumbersome language, make the regulations internally consistent, and improve permitting processing for city staff, applicants, and improve processes for residents. And number 3, the potential code amendments are in the best interest of the public health, safety, and welfare. I guess I would entertain a motion now to adopt the findings, conclusions, and recommendations listed in attachment 1. Commissioner Dodd.
I move to adopt the findings, conclusions, and recommendations listed in attachment 1.
Sorry, can I, and does that include the amendments recommended by staff this evening?
And the amendments recommended by staff this evening.
Great. Is Commissioner Robson.
I'll second that motion.
Great. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, I guess we can vote by acclamation here. If you're in favor of the motion, raise your hand. With all those present in favor, consider the attachment 1 adopted, and we authorize by this vote Chair Kiernan to sign and authorize the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you all for the feedback, and thank you to staff too that helped put this all together. So thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Moving along into the new year, we will open a study session on the 2022 planning docket.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to share my screen. Been using too many different programs, and I forget where the buttons are. Okay. Are we up and running? Great. Thank you. So this is just a quick recap of what we talked about back in December with the Planning Commission. There are a few things that I want to highlight. Again, this is starting on page 35 in your packet. And what's mainly different from what we presented before is that we've added hours and identified what the 22 priorities for the docket and the work program would be. So tonight we're looking for some feedback from the Planning Commission. There were 2 items that the Commission asked that we add. One of them has been added. The other, I'm seeking some additional guidance because I wasn't quite sure how to incorporate it into the docket. So we'll get to that toward the end of the presentation. Also back in December, I gave you an overview of what had been accomplished in the 21 docket so far. I am not repeating that this evening, but I do have that information if you did want a recap of that later on. So with that, I'm going to jump into this. And so the organization, as I mentioned before, is a little bit different this year. So these are the main categories that we've separated it into. We have the comp plan update. And actually, one of the changes that I made, I believe from December, is I've split this into the comp plan update and then the private requests. So that's now task number 2, are the private requests. And that's, I believe, what Mr. Mala wants to speak to this evening is one of those specific requests. And I'll get into these in just a little bit. So these are the main categories that we've divided the different tasks into. This is the first one, and this is about the comp plan update. One of the things that we discussed last time, and I wanted to emphasize, is just how much is already on our plate as far as the update. But we are putting a significant focus, as you can see from the hours that are assigned, particularly to tasks B, C, and D. B is evaluation of the implementation of the existing plan. And I think that's on my next, nope, sorry. Backing up. So that's the evaluation of the existing plan is really looking at how well have we done in terms of implementation of the plan so far. And then the second part of that is really applying the social justice, racial equity lens to that in terms of our existing policies and how those do or do not promote social justice and racial equity. So it's starting from that baseline as we move forward then into the update of the plan in 24. Developing and initiating a public engagement plan. This is really critical because we need to get off on the right foot. And that's making sure that we put together a comprehensive approach to making sure that we're doing as broad of an outreach as we can and effectively engaging all the different interest groups and communities within Bothell so that we get their input, not only at the beginning of the process when we do the scoping, which is the next major task for this year, but also as we move forward at developing the policies and the implementation. So those are really the 3 keys and the largest amounts of time that we have devoted to the comp plan update for this year. And then we've got some integration of a couple of other elements that we think we can incorporate relatively easily this year. The second part of this is for the private amendment requests. And there are 3 that, again, we're suggesting we defer to be part of that update. So they would actually get started in 23 and they'd be incorporated into the overall periodic update. And then we have others that we're suggesting that we do this year as part of the 22 annual amendment cycle. And those would then sort of be a precursor to some of the other things that we would do in the comp plan. And the main separation, the distinction that we're making here is that those four really have some direct impacts in terms of affordable housing. And we know that's an important issue for the council as well as for the planning commission. So we think the sooner we can do those, the better. And we don't feel that that would detract a great deal from the other work that we need to do on the comp plan. And it could be in complement to that. The other three items, we're not saying that they're any less important, but we feel that those may also be addressed through some of the missing middle housing work that is currently being done with the code. So we could still proceed with those comp plan changes, but in terms of the ability of those property owners to do additional development on their properties, that may be addressed through the missing middle work that Dave Boyd is going to be bringing forward this year. And then you can see some of the other things here that we're already talking about as far as incorporating into the comp plan update. And I will note something that Chair Curd brought up at the last meeting regarding some state legislation. There's some major legislation pending right now, and this is a short session, so we will know in March whether or not the legislation passes. There are two significant bills, one in the Senate, one in the House, that I know one has a companion bill. The Senate bill has a companion bill in the House. I don't know if it's the other is true, but it's Senate Bill 5670 and House Bill 1981. Those both address missing middle housing specifically and put some requirements on local jurisdictions to incorporate those into our codes and our plans. There are different provisions in each of the bills and how they approach that. So we're closely following that, and in both cases, those would be mandates that we would need to address. So I think we're already in a position where we can do that, depending on what the state legislation does. And we can talk some more about the legislation later on if the commission would like to do that. So as far as the missing middle housing, this is something that has already started with the commission. And as I said, Senior Planner Dave Boyd is going to be working on that. That's going to be one of his major tasks for this year, assuming it remains a priority for the council, and I'm presuming that it will. And it's highlighted in green because this is one of the items that we have in our docket that actually has some outside funding. So we have the HOPI grant, housing affordability planning implementation. Dave, did I get that right?
That's a housing action plan implementation.
Thank you. I knew there was implementation and housing in there somewhere. So we do have funding for that. And there's, I believe, some additional funding that may be available later on that we can also pursue to help expand on that if we need to. So that's looking at code amendments. And as I already mentioned, we're following the state legislation that's also pending on that. We're also including accessory dwelling units as part of that discussion with the missing middle housing. So there's some other things that we're looking into there that will take up some additional time. And as you can see, we have some hours, significant hours devoted to that as well. In addition to our consultant hours, a significant amount of Dave's time this year, and also working with Arch. And then that includes both the ADUs and the other amendments. So as far as Canyon Park implementation, this is task number 4. This is in addition to the comp plan update, which will take the majority of Nathan Lamb's time, and obviously some time from Dave Boyd as well as myself and a few other folks. This is what Nathan Lamb's focus will be this year as well, and that's the Canyon Park implementation, the transfer of development rights that you're aware of that we're working on right now with a consultant. The PSRC certification is something that's very important that he's currently working on the submittal for that. We need to get that certification in order to remain eligible for transportation funding for not just for Canyon Park, but for that sub area, particularly for the Regional Growth Center. The TDR program is moving forward. We've done phase 1, which is the analysis, the feasibility. It has been determined that it is feasible. Sound Transit has agreed to fund the second phase of that, which is the implementation. So the consultants will be working on developing the code. And I believe Nathan is going to be coming to you with a briefing on the feasibility study sometime in the next few meetings. So you'll get an update on that. But that, again, is going to be another major task effort this year. The other major effort that we have, and this is, again, Dave Boyd's area focus, is going to be the downtown plan implementation. So we have the update of the planned action EIS. And as we've discussed before, when we did the adoption of the plan back in 2009, there was a planned action EIS similar to what we just did recently for Canyon Park that set certain thresholds under which, if the development occurred within that threshold consistent with the plan, they did not have to do their own environmental review. We are fast approaching the top of that threshold. And if we exceed it, then projects will have to do their own environmental review, which is a disincentive to development in the downtown. And we want to keep that incentive there if we can. So this would increase that development capacity beyond the current thresholds. And again, this has that outside funding. That's the TODI grant, which is the Transit-Oriented Development Implementation. I think I got that one right. So that's, again, we have some funding for that. So that's why that's a higher priority, and to get going on that, probably not until maybe the second half of this year. So we can get through some of the other things, particularly the missing middle. We have a Historic Preservation Code amendment. This is a relatively minor amendment that's come up, but we want to try to address it. This will not involve a great deal of time for either Dave or Nathan, because we're going to be using our historic preservation consultant to do most of that work, but we'll need their help a little bit on the processing. That's why you see a small number associated with that as far as the hours. The next one is also, did I skip something? Oh, these are a few of the other amendments. I skipped over the Shoreline Master Program, or maybe I've got it out of order, but I'll continue on. These are some code amendments that we're working on. So the parking reductions, you're already working on that. The housekeeping amendments you've just passed this evening. Looking at other TDR programs, that'll be an outgrowth of the TDR work that's being done right now in Canyon Park. Another small issue that's come up is about hobby beekeeping. So again, I'll be using other staff to help develop this, so it's not taking away from the strategic planning staff capacity, just to do a little bit of the processing for that. But we need to put some regulations in place for hobby beekeeping. And then, as Nathan referred to, we'll be doing the 22 housekeeping amendments, and those will come to you later on this year as well. So I got these a little bit out of order in terms of the task order, but this is number 6 is the Shoreline Master Program. And these are the 3 main areas that we're looking at that need updating. And this would be, again, Dave Boyd's, one of his task assignments for this year. The other ones are miscellaneous tasks that we have. So we heard about the annexations last time, tree protection, the gateway design regulations, sign code and landscape have been on the docket for the last 2 or 3 or more years in some cases. And again, there's significant amounts of time that goes into those, and we run out of staff time to do some things. We can't do everything. So at this point, staff is still recommending these be a little bit lower on the priority list as far as the docket for this year. But because our main focus really needs to be on those other things that I listed, particularly getting the comp plan update going. But again, council can change these priorities if at their discretion. That's certainly their prerogative. There are 3 items that have been on the list for a few years, and we're recommending that these be removed because we don't feel they're still pressing issues that would require any staff time. So as far as next steps, we are asking you to review these changes this evening, really paying attention more to the hours and the priorities that we're setting here, and then providing any feedback that will carry forward to the city council. I've asked the chair, Mr. Kiernan, to attend that meeting on the 15th and represent the planning commission there as well. So he is, we had originally talked about the 8th. Today we got moved to the 15th. So hopefully he's available for that. If not, I'll be speaking with Vice Chair Kurd about being there. But I think it is important that we have that opportunity for the commission to be heard. And obviously we will carry your comments forward in any case, but it's also good for someone from the commission to be there to help answer questions and provide your feedback directly to the city council. And then, as I mentioned, there was a couple of things that came up last time on the docket from the Planning Commission. One of them had to do with, I'm sorry, I got too many pages in front of me here. One of them had to do with HVAC equipment and how we address that. We added an item for that, and that is I thought, that is on page 5 of the docket. It is task number 7H, outdoor HVAC and roof mounted equipment code requirements, placement, setback, screening. So it's more comprehensive than what the housekeeping amendment was that you talked about this evening. So I want to make sure that we've captured everything there. We are recommending deferral on that at this point. We think that's something that we can do as part of the code update that comes a little bit later on as part of implementation of the comp plan. But we did include that. And then the other item that came up last time was for, excuse me, parking management. We have one right now for downtown, and there was some discussion about having one citywide, and was not quite sure how to incorporate that into the docket. So I would appreciate a little bit more discussion and guidance from the commission on that specific item this evening. So with that, Mr. Chair, I am happy to answer any questions or provide any additional discussion.
Great. All right. Yeah. Commissioner Gustafson.
And we do, and we do have Mr. Chudy would like to comment as well.
Oh, right.
Just as a reminder.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kurd. Sarah Gustafson here. I have 2 questions, and I'll start with the first. About the items that have been taken off the housekeeping docket for good. I'm really happy to see things being simple. I do have some curiosity about the private streets, because I know private streets in the Canyon Park area has sometimes been a subject of discussion. I want to see if that would intersect with some of the concerns of the Canyon Park Business Owners Association. And the other thing I was wondering why it's been taken off is actually the adult entertainment. And the reason is because about 2 years ago, 2 of the other commissioners and I attended a training, and they talked about how sometimes how certain restrictions on adult entertainment can have some really unintended consequences for independent people in that line of business. So curious.
And I'll take the second question first. So in terms of the adult entertainment has really had to do with what has been referred to colloquially as bikini baristas. That was I think the issue that had come up, and it was not unique to Bothell. It's actually come up in several jurisdictions. Some have tried to regulate it. It's been challenged. I'm not saying that there's not an issue or not a way to regulate it, but it's something that the council has not elevated to a priority. And I have not been hearing that it's really as big of an issue as it has been in the past. The council may tell me differently, and we'll keep it on the list. So we're just asking if the council would like to remove it at this point. There certainly are First Amendment issues with that, and it does get a little bit challenging, but it's not something that we've looked into at this point. As far as the first question regarding private streets, that's actually an item that the staff had added to the list about 3 years ago, because we were getting a lot of requests, particularly new residential development for private streets. And it was creating challenges, and we felt creating potentially some long-term issues for the city, because private streets tend not to be maintained, and then residents come to the city asking for them to be turned over as public streets, similar to the issue that we have right now in Canyon Park, as you've noted, Commissioner Gustafson. What we have done is we've actually increased the standards for private streets. That was another issue that we had. And surprisingly, with those increased standards, we have not had the same number of requests for private streets in residential development. So it's really become less of an issue from that standpoint. It would not really address the issues right now that we have in Canyon Park regarding private streets. So it doesn't affect that particular issue. Thank you for those questions. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Are there other questions from the commission? All right. I think that we have some attendees that may want to weigh in on this issue or on this draft 2022 docket.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I actually have two people now in the attendee room. So I'm going to ask Mala to unmute. And I believe, Mala, can you hear me? There
no?
you are. Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay.
So I believe you're speaking to one of the private amendment requests. Could you tell me again what your address is?
It's 22703 Meridian Avenue South, Bothell, Washington. It's a third house from 228 and Meridian.
Okay, I'm not sure which one that is. Dave, could you help me here?
Yes, actually, it's not one of the private requests. It's he is asking if there is a possibility of moving forward on the Nike Hill amendments.
Oh, I'm sorry, Nike Hill. Okay, so this is item 1J then.
Yeah, basically, like, I'm like, it took like almost 6 years. Like, I started, like, I bought this house 2015, and that time, like, Nike Hill zone happening, and then I hear like 2-3 years back, they submitted to city council. I'm not sure like what's going on. Like, it's almost 6 years. Just I want to know like why this is like pending. Like, it's 6 years will take the rezoning process. Just I'm sorry, like, just this is a question, like common question like.
Okay, we typically don't respond directly to questions during the public comment.
Okay.
But we can have Dave Boyd follow up with you. And
Okay.
Yeah, if you have anything else you'd like to add, you still have about a minute and a half.
Yeah, and also like it say like if this Nike Hill rezone is moved to 2024, like right now I have a 7200 zoning. So can I put application? I'm planning to put application for rezoning on 7200 this year end. It will take maybe 1.5 year. That time, if Nike Hill rezone approves, then what happened to my current rezoning? So shall I go to new zoning process or the old one?
Okay, so Dave will follow up with you, and he'll be able to answer those questions more directly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and then also have Ty Pendergraft, who's asking to speak. Ty, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Michael.
Okay, you have 3 minutes.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I will say that I haven't been tuned in for the entire planning commission, but I appreciate that you guys are so progressive in trying to figure out ways to solve some of the housing supply issues that we're desperately facing in the Puget Sound area. And so I'm a part of the Ferullo amendment request. And so if everybody's familiar with that area, it's right off of Bothell Everett Highway. And we, at this point in time, the land is not being used to the highest and best necessarily. And it's a really convenient place for the construction company to be operating. But the access to 527 and 405 and density, and hoping that you might consider the up zone, if you will, to an RAC that gives the most flexibility. And we don't necessarily think that we're going to have only multifamily. Perhaps there's some townhouse use there, but regardless, we would be, I know that no matter what we do, there's going to be an affordable component to it, and more than happy to work through that. And because obviously, if you create affordability through more density, and we don't have a lot of land left in the UGA, so that's the big part of what made sense to me. The landowners are obviously looking to benefit from the zoning, but at this point in time, that the transit and the accessibility to 405 and to Bothell Everett Highway and downtown Bothell makes so much sense. So we're hopeful that you guys were all going to support the RAC, and I know there's some other things on the docket there that you're thinking about, and there's so much staff time that goes into it, but we're hopeful that you guys can make some time for that use, because there's just so little left, and we've got some thoughtful planning behind it, and want to make a lot of good use out of that space. So anyway, thanks so much for considering it on the 2022, and any follow-up questions, we're here and happy to address them. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. All right.
And I should note, Mr. Chair, that Dave Boyd is, we included the private requests in your packet, and Dave can answer any questions about those as well. I believe I saw Commissioner Dodd's hand.
Yes, Commissioner Dodd.
Yeah, thank you. So sorry, he was quiet till I unmuted. So the Nike Hill upzone history, I think, would be really helpful information for everybody to get. It definitely predates, I think, all of our involvement in the commission. Maybe Vice Chair Kurt was there, but not even him. So just for history, especially if we go to re-examine that. That's all. Thank you.
That actually predates me as well, so I'll let Dave give a quick synopsis of the history there.
I'll try to make it very brief. So we got applications from two property owners in the Nike Hill area. One property owner that owned a large area to the north of the DNR, the Shelton View Woods property, and another from a small property owner near Mr. Chudy's property, both requesting upzones. And so we took through the Planning Commission a fairly comprehensive process looking at that whole area, and which is identified as a neighborhood activity center in our comprehensive plan, centered on the intersection of Meridian and 228. The Planning Commission did make a recommendation to Council, but Council chose, along with one other upzone in the off of East Riverside Drive, but at the time Council chose to defer those, and in subsequent, but we've kept it on the docket each year, I think starting 2 years ago, the direction was to defer it to the comprehensive plan update. So this is the first, Mr. Chudy's interest in the upzone is really the first we've heard back from any of the constituents there about wanting to move this up. And there is a possibility, and I will get back to to Mr. Chudy about this, as Director Cotterman mentioned, that what he's looking to do could possibly be covered in our missing middle amendments as well. So we'll look at that and bring that back to you as well.
And I would just add, one of the reasons that we're recommending that this still be deferred to the overall comp plan update is because of a lot of the other changes that are going on. And we're going to be looking at all of our activity areas. This is one of them. So we're going to be looking at other activity areas as well and seeing what other changes to land use and zoning we might want to make in those areas. And we think it's better to do that in a more comprehensive fashion.
Great. I see Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Dave, can you tell me, did the Planning Commission several years back, when they took it to council, recommended to council, did they recommend the action or for the upzone? Were they recommending that or recommending it not happen? It sounds like maybe the Planning Commission was going to go ahead with that, forwarded that to council, and council said, no, thanks, not right now, let's defer it. Just curious.
The Planning Commission did recommend some changes. I don't think they went, actually that was an item that Bruce Blackburn was the lead staff on. So I'm not sure that they did recommend any upzone to the property adjacent to the Shelton View Woods, or that's actually probably most people consider it part of the Shelton View Woods. But they did. There were some upzones around 228th and Meridian that would likely have included Mr. Chudy's property. So I can't give a lot of detail about why it was deferred. I know that it was also in the same period of time when we were adding residential designation to Canyon Park in order to meet our Snohomish County growth targets, and the Nike Hill upzones weren't required to do that. So I think that entered into the decision to defer it.
And quick follow-up, do we typically have, like we would with building permits and other things, sort of a timeline by which we try to get people some sort of answer, even if it's it's just going to take this process, at least we fill them in, like, we got 6 months or 90 days or something for them to at least understand, oh, we have to defer it, or we're going to recommend to council, or we can't do it now. I imagine we communicate with them.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you always do, from my experience.
So yeah, any application that's received by October 31st is eligible.
Right, for the Planning Commission, yeah.
Yeah, to be considered in the next year's docket. So we let them know that that's the process. And then I guess once an item gets deferred, though, unless it's deferred to a specific date, like this eventually was deferred to the 2024 comp plan update, there isn't a sort of a timeline for when that would be considered.
Okay, appreciate it.
Are there any other comments about the draft docket?
So I had two questions. One, did we capture the HVAC correctly, even though we're recommending deferral? And the second was the parking study.
And I see Commissioner Gustafson had her hand up too. Sorry to cut you off.
Sarah Gustafson here. Maybe we should listen to Director Cotterman's questions, because I'm guessing they'll frame the discussion.
Great. So we can start with the HVAC discussion. A brief reminder for those listening, we had some discussion around, it's not called sheltering. What is it called? Screening of HVAC units. Currently, there was a reference in our code to screening and setbacks of HVAC 5 feet away from structures. And there's some discussion around whether screening is necessary. We also have been out in the town around, and we saw an area that wasn't screened. And so there's some question on if screening is applicable or is even kind of being looked at in permitting. And so the code, or not the code amendment, sorry, the planning docket item that addresses this. Remind me on, this is item 7H. On page 43 of the agenda. Does it capture everything that we had, talked about? It says placement, setbacks, and screening. If I recall, there was discussion about whether this was, it was necessary to even include. There's sort of different perspectives that showed up on commission, ranging between maybe reduction in setbacks and reduction or liberalization of the code. And there were also suggestions of removal of section of code. So does this item 7H capture the full extent of what we were looking for? It's also deferred, so I don't know if it really matters at this time.
Well, we want to make sure that we've captured it, though, for purposes of, if the commission wants to suggest this be a higher priority to the council, that we've got the right language in here for what that would entail. The other thing I would mention is we also mentioned roof mounted equipment. So it's, as part of that, and that's something that's come up in the staff is we probably need to revisit our requirements for screening for roof mounted equipment as well. Is this enough?
Commissioner Westerbeck?
Well, I know, thank you, Vice Chair Curd. I know I was one of the ones who wanted to sort of liberalize it, just because I'm one of those people who, my profession, I have to try and hide these things and find places for them. And it can be a real challenge sometimes as we get more dense. I mean, we are looking at missing middle and so forth. I'm all for screening. I think if we were gonna, for example, say, oh, they can be in the front setback or in the front, we probably don't want to look at a heat pump. But interestingly enough, in my social media, there was a post about screening equipment in front yards in more dense places. And they were just saying, hey, sometimes you have to put it there, but at least put something around it. I thought that seems like a pretty good compromise. So I think deferring is fine. I don't think this is a hot button issue, but since it came up, I wanted to comment on that. Just, I know how challenging it can be to find a place for these things. I've gone through it a bunch of times. I'm going through it now. So, and then I really did like that we're deferring to the fire code, allowing a 3-foot separation, because most of these pieces of equipment now are so quiet. It's not much of a problem. So it's more like just about, will they fit? And then are they, ugly or not? So I think so far I'm pretty pleased with how you guys captured it and the way it's going forward. I'd want our time spent on other things, frankly. So appreciate the efforts, though, very much.
Commissioner Dodd?
Just a side question about screening. Does that add any significant cost to the installation of this equipment?
I can comment on that. Usually it's an inexpensive fence or some shrubs or something. So it's very low cost.
Where it maybe is a little more significant is for the rooftop equipment and screening that, because that then requires a structural review by our building department, and that's why they raised that issue as something a little more significant.
Thank you.
So I'm kind of hearing that the item generally encapsulates the discussion we had, and we're fine with it. And the deferral is probably warranted in the face of our other priorities. On your second question, which forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think it was parking management. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone have any comments on parking management and prioritization?
So
Yeah.
very quickly, if I could just say that, so there is an item in here already that's been in the docket before about parking management for the downtown. I didn't feel, based on the discussion that I heard, that I could incorporate it into that. It seemed like it was a bigger, broader issue. So that was my dilemma in this, and why there's nothing in there right now.
Great. Commissioner Gustafson, do you have some comments on this?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you, Director Cotterman. My question is really, how big can any proposed amendment or changes to parking at this point be? Do we have the funding or the staff hours to dig in as much as we would like? And is it possible that now is the best time to do it? Do we want to wait until some funding becomes available with new legislation? I would like to push ahead, but before I start asking lots of questions, what is the scope of what we could actually do right now?
Mm-hmm. That is the seminal question. So I think the best answer I have for you is this particular item. You'll note that it is parking requirements related to outcome of parking management plan or phase 2 study. This is the one for the downtown, not funded, and it's been deferred a few times. I don't think it's necessarily that cost intensive to do a parking study, particularly for the downtown. But it hasn't risen to the level of a priority, and we don't have the staff resources to do it without some type of outside consultant help. I don't know. I don't know that we'd have the staff expertise to do a real parking study, management study either. So I think it's one of those things. As I recall the discussion last time, it was about anywhere that we look at reducing parking, we should also look at a parking management study or have some type of parking management program, which makes sense. But it's hard for me to define at this point how big of that scope would be, because I don't know what the geographic area would be. I don't know what the reduction would be, and I don't know what other parking might be available in the area. So it really is much more area specific, and it's difficult for me to respond to that. Dave has his hand up. Maybe he has some better insights than I do. I'm guessing he does.
I just thought I would weigh in. So downtown is unique in this regard because, one, the downtown sub-area plan, the comprehensive plan portion, specifically calls for a parking management plan to be done as a future city action. So, and that's what we were proposing to do. We did a phase 1 parking study. Council balked at doing a second phase study that would have taken us a little bit closer to that. And it was spurred by the fact that that's where we were getting the vast majority of the concerns about parking conflicts, where we had parking, street parking that was really intended to serve the downtown businesses that was getting used by residents. And I think you all understand the issues there. So that's why that item is in there. There, as other, as development increases in some of the other areas of the city, then I think it might make sense to also do a similar approach there. But right now, the issue has been in downtown, and it's kind of on hold with the reduction in people driving during COVID. But I imagine it will will become a hotter issue again when things go back to, or if things go back to the way they were.
Are there other perspectives or comments on this item? Yeah, Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kurd, and everyone. I mean, I could talk way too long on parking. We all know that. I do believe there's a lot of more everyday case studies of cities that are repealing parking minimums, especially in downtowns. I do think in Bothell, we would need to probably do a parking management because even Donald Shoup, who wrote the 750-page book on this, says you need to manage your parking and then repeal your parking minimums. And we all have to really keep in mind, I've said this before, most people building buildings are going to build the amount of parking they think is appropriate, and they usually know what that is. So it can be as simple as just striking the code, the language, and we all know how to do that. I don't think we need to study at great length. And I think that we have some people on council who may agree with that. But anyway, my 2 cents, I think it could be easier than we think. And if nothing else, I think about like parking is really about, you can make space for cars, which are really big, 200, 300 square feet, 150 square foot, plus driveways and stuff. You know, very limited downtown area where we want it to thrive and be safe for people and have commerce and have economic, progress, economic development. A car takes up a ton of space versus a person. So we'll just get a lot more of what we want if we make it for people first, and then we start to allow people to pay for the parking they want. This is one of those areas where we actually probably do want the market just to provide the parking needed. Cars are contributing enormous amounts of greenhouse gases too. So I know council has brought that up. They've also brought up parking lots, impervious surface parking lots. They exacerbate our stormwater issues. So we have a lot of reasons we should be looking hard at the challenges that parking presents to us as a city. So I'll keep it at that. Thank you.
So I'm hearing that the area extent of management downtown is obviously a good place to start, but maybe citywide parking management, especially in areas because, Canyon Park is going to be hopefully happening. And, there's other regional activity centers too around our city, or residential activity centers and office spaces too, that might, benefit from more comprehensive parking management. So in terms of area, I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing it's more, there's interest for citywide, although, downtown is also important. Walking a very two-sided line there, but what about the other?
I'm all for citywide, sorry.
Okay, I didn't want to put words in people's mouths, but okay. What about the other element of this amendment, which was, or not amendment, sorry, this planning item, which was, was it active? Were you wondering about active management or, I'm sorry.
No, I mean, this is exactly why I'm looking for some additional direction, because it wasn't really clear in my mind as well. And that's, so we've got the downtown, as we've said, I think it's a well-defined area. It's also an area where we have more public parking. And when we talk about management, to me, that's managing public parking, because I don't know how much we can manage private parking except on a voluntary basis. If we get some type of a parking agreement in place with privately owned spaces. Other parts of the city, we don't have the same amount of public parking, particularly in Canyon Park. They're all private streets for the most part. So, and it's all private property where we have the parking lots. So we could try to put something in place would be more of a voluntary association that would manage the parking. I guess I'm a little bit stymied in terms of how that might be done. I'm just not familiar with that aspect of it. Looks like Commissioner Dodd has some words of wisdom.
Do you have some clarity that you can bring?
Yeah, I think, so one, I think private parking management will naturally come after we have public parking management, because already we can see some of the buildings, I think Six Oaks in particular, manages their parking quite enthusiastically, as there have been issues with people taking their time there. So I think for me, if I were to summarize what the commission has been looking for with regard to parking, it's sort of twofold. It's making sure that we're not requiring more parking than developers want to put in a project. Letting developers choose a little bit, getting a little less strict on that, especially downtown, but I would say more all over. As Commissioner Westerbeck has said many times, developers are going to build the amount they think they need to be successful. And then I think married with that needs to be in areas where we have a lot of public parking, like downtown, making sure that we're managing that parking so that it doesn't become a public burden to have, if we aren't over parked on private properties, then people could take advantage, downtown. So it's kind of together, we need to see those. So it might be two items, but they go together in my mind, because if you do one before the other, it gets kind of funky. And I'm looking for the other commissioners to confirm that I've kind of got the pulse of what we're looking for.
So if I could try to recap that, and I'll go back and watch the tape too, but I think what I'm taking away from that is this may be less about a parking management task than it is about a reduced parking task. And the parking management would be an outgrowth of that. So I'm thinking that we add under other code amendments under task 7, we already have item A, which is the residential parking reductions that Dave's working on, but that's a very narrowly defined task right now. And we add a task after that that would be look at reducing parking overall wherever possible. I'll come up with better language than that, not quite that squishy, but look at parking reductions citywide for various uses, something along those lines. And as part of that, explore better management of more efficient management of parking or something along those lines. Is that sort of where we think we're headed with this?
I would say so. I think that's been a theme of our parking discussions. I also think it was a theme in our last council elections. I would be curious to know with the current makeup where they all stand on this, because I think we've got folks who trend more conservative who want that, developers to be able to choose. We've also got folks who are very, very concerned about the environment and how parking sort of invites driving. And we would like to invite other methods of transportation. So I think it's a natural point of agreement, if I could be a little speculative.
Commissioner Gustafson, and then I'm going to add a comment.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Sarah Gustafson here. I am going to disagree with the consensus on detailed points, but agree with the overall consensus. I believe that parking management is an essential part of this, because I tend to somewhat reject the argument that developers know quite how much to build. I do believe that sometimes when there's a public right of way, there can be an externality where even with really, really great intentions, some of that parking need might spill over into those spaces. And there's been a lot of concern from council members and from community members that this might impact the spaces available to older people, families, and people with disabilities. And I think these questions could be resolved through a muscular parking strategy. With that said, I absolutely am inspired by Commissioner Westerbeck's vision and Commissioner Dodd's vision. I think we need to have this debate and bring it as forward as much as possible. And I believe we should make a motion to council, or consider making a motion to council that lays out the vision of where we want to go. And an example of that might be using the language in the House Bill 1782, which actually proposes some pretty big changes to parking. For example, if for missing middle housing around transit stops, there would be 0 parking spaces required. And I would like to see us recommend something along those lines. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. My brief comment is trying to bring some clarity. I think maybe there's some different definitions of parking management right now on the commission. And so I think that in general, we have a united shared principle. And one of the guiding things is that throughout the past year, we've seen that Bothell has the highest parking requirements basically in Puget Sound. And that's something that is frightening, considering the externalities. All of us share that. And so right-sizing parking is critical. And we as Planning Commission have this vision. We have different visions, and we see like end goals, which would be very likely reduction in parking. But in order to achieve that, there has to be some sort of mechanism. And that mechanism is referred to as parking management. But those management strategies vary wildly. They vary between enforcement of parking and parking time slots. They vary by accessibility requirements. They vary by private cost institutions that you have to pay to park or whatever, mobile, pay by mobile, whatever, and all these other places you visit. And so I think that the commission, we really want to have the discussions and have the vision and the guidance talks. But ultimately, it's really council's prerogative to have the enforcement and the mechanism. And so I think there's a little bit of discord in this discussion right now. I don't want to belabor it too much, especially because we'll be coming back with the draft. I think you said it was the 15th of February that we'll be forwarding it on. I don't think we need to have anything tonight.
Actually, this is the opportunity tonight. It's going to the council on February 15th.
Okay.
So that's why I'm looking for some clarity on this.
I see.
But I appreciate what you just said. I think that was very helpful. I think there are a lot of different aspects to parking management, and we haven't really pinned that down. And I'm not sure that we need to at this point. And I'm going to come back to my suggestion. I know Commissioner Westerbeck has something to say as well, so I'll wait until after he speaks.
Great. Yeah, Commissioner Westerbeck.
It's okay. Everyone can keep going. Vice Chair Kerr really echoed mostly what I wanted to say. I would add, so parking management is critical. The point I would make in part is I live in the downtown area, and I think I've just mentioned this before. We provide a lot of free parking as a city, and it hasn't been a problem obviously for decades. But now there's a lot of competition for it, and so there's a huge value to that for the city. We maintain it, we provide it, the land value itself, and that's something that people do. You guys know as planners, take into account when they're planning a city. There's enormous value in that. So making sure there's turnover, that there's enough accessible places for people who do need that, and then the third tier that Commissioner Kerr mentioned, being having to pay for parking, because I see cars parked for, like during the snowstorm, cars I noticed didn't move for 10, 12 days from street parking. So, they're just storing their cars in the street for free. We can't store anything else in the street for free except a car. So if they have to move every 4 hours, whatever, and they live in an apartment and they don't want to pay for the parking, we're nudging them, saying it's fine, you can have a car, but you're gonna have to go find a place to put it, and you probably have to pay for it in a lot, or you're gonna have to pay for it at your apartment, or a market will spring up for parking on the edge of downtown for people to park their cars, like a lot of cities. So that's really, I'm just echoing what Commissioner Curd said, that this there'll be a whole system to it. People won't be without it, but it'll be much more structured. And then we actually get to reclaim a lot of that city space and either make money off of it or at least control it in such a way that it's shared among people who want to use it much more freely. And so people aren't parked for 12 days at a time. And I think I remember council started to tackle this in 2017, a couple councils back, and kind of shelved it, but it seems like it's more ripe for discussion now than ever, given all the development we've seen and the dire need for it. So anyway, yeah, it's critical discussion. Thank you. And I would agree with Commissioner Gustafson. I don't have any problem with what you said. I agree with you.
So if I can make a suggestion, Mr. Chair, I'm going to suggest that we do something along the lines of what I had suggested a little bit ago, which is we'll add a task under other code amendments that is really more focused on reducing parking. And I bring that up for a couple of reasons. One is I still think that's at the crux of the issue here. Obviously, there are a lot of things that go along with that. And if it's okay with the commission, I will work with the chair, Chair Curd, in the actual language for that to make sure that we capture something there. And I'll try to add something more about, the management or efficient use of parking, or looking at it a little more comprehensively than just reduced parking, that there's more to it than that. The other reason I bring this up is there are two of these items in particular that when we take them to the council in February, we're going to ask for some additional guidance from the council. One of them is on missing middle, because we're going down a certain path there, and we have 3 new council members, and we want to make sure that before we go too far down the path with the consultant, that we're going as far or as the council wants us to in that regard. We'll have the similar question to them about reduced parking, and we'll also mention what a priority that is for the commission. So that would be my suggestion. And now I'll shut up and let Commissioner Dodd talk.
Commissioner Dodd.
Thank you. It's really quick, but I would suggest and hope that we could be very clear that we mean reducing the required parking, like not just reducing parking, because I think one of those sounds a lot scarier than it needs to. So we're looking at reducing the amount of required parking. Thank you.
Okay, good point. Good point. Thank you.
Yep. I concur. Okay, is that generally a good idea? I don't want to just speak for the whole commission here, but can I get some thumbs up? Okay, I'm seeing like unanimous thumbs up. I think this works, and I'd be happy to work with you offline on some verbiage.
Thank you.
Great. All right. With that, was there
any other comments on the docket?
Oh, well, we've got a very busy year ahead.
We do.
And excited that there's more capacity in community development this year with Nathan and other new staff. So yeah, excited to have another year and to get into it. So with that, I think we'll close this item and move along to any unfinished business. Which
I don't believe we have any unfinished business, Mr. Chair.
All right. Any reports from staff?
I have just a few items this evening that I wanted to highlight for you. I believe the official word out there is that City Hall is proposed to reopen on February 9th. I think that is going to change So just to give you a heads up with everything going on with the latest variant. And as a recent victim of COVID, I can tell you that it's not fun. So we're seeing a lot more people that are getting it, even those of us that have been vaccinated. So I think we're looking at probably pushing that date out. Excuse me, don't have an official date yet, but just to let you know that's likely happening. I want to say thanks again to Chair Kurd and others that helped put together the walking tour. I thought that was very successful. Everything but the weather. So we had no control over that. Couldn't have been more miserable that day, I don't think, as far as wet as it was, but great turnout. We had all the commissioners there. We had pretty good turnout from Kenmore as well. So, and Commissioner Kurd did a great job talking us through the tour. So thank you again for that. Very, very helpful. The applications for board and commissioners is going to be opening up next week, January 24th, and that'll be open through the 19th. So if we have two commissioners that are up for reappointment, Commissioners Dodd and Kiernan. So hopefully you will reapply. And we do have one opening on the Planning Commission. We also have openings on other boards and commissions. So if you know folks that would be interested, encourage them to apply. Those materials would be available next week online. I would also note that today is the Nathan's 1-year anniversary with the city. So we're very excited. He's been with us for a whole year, and it's been great having him here. And he's also happy to be here still, which is good news. So we want to keep him happy. And then the other thing I have for you is the council has been asking, they've been having discussions lately about interactions with board and commissions and how that they can do that. So there've been a couple of things that have come up. One is they're talking about doing a joint meeting a couple times a year. So they would do they do half of the boards and commissions one time and then the other half another time. So basically each board and commission would have one joint meeting a year with the city council. Also looking at getting regular updates on the agenda so that if there's a time for a board or commission chair to come to the council and give them an update on the work that's being done. Since we do the annual docket with the city council of the planning commission and also the landmark preservation board, we're talking about having Chair Kiernan come on the 15th. I think I mentioned this earlier in the docket discussion. That would kind of be part of that reporting. So we're working with him on that. The other question is there anything else that the board or that the planning commission thinks would be helpful in terms of interaction with the city council or relationship with the city council? And specifically in the past, we've had liaisons. City council members that have acted as liaisons with individual board and commission members. There's sort of mixed feelings about, whether that's been helpful or not. So would like some feedback from the commission on those questions. Are there things that, other ideas you have for interactions with the city council? And how do you feel about having a council liaison?
Commissioner Dodd.
Thank you. I had time to overthink this while you were talking. And I think liaisons and even having the chairs go to council meetings, whatever direction one person is traveling, you sort of lose contact with other folks on that body, whether it's, people on council only hearing from one commissioner or people on the commission only hearing from one council member. I love the idea of joint meetings. I almost think, there's supposed to be 7 of us. There are 7 council members. And do the other boards and commissions have 7 positions as well, typically, for most of them?
Give or take, yeah, it's generally around that number.
I wonder if even just like a quarterly or every 6 months, like round table where like everybody in position 1, has a meeting or something so that at least there's some continuity there and you have just a discussion, like, and everybody can learn like what's happening on other boards, what's happening with council, like everybody comes with some updates and you just sort of build some community there. I think it's a shame that we're all neighbors and like there are some council people who reach out to talk about stuff that's on our docket or when stuff circles up to council, they want to get some background, but I would say at any given time, that's only a few people on council. I mean, for obvious reasons, but I would love to just have some continuity there. And I think there are no OPMA problems necessarily if it's one person from each board meeting. So that's a random thought that might be too much equipment for people, but struck me as kind of interesting.
So the roundtable you're talking about would be just one from each board and commission?
Yeah, so like
Okay.
everybody, so planning commissioner one, city council member one, landmarks board one, like, you know, and then and so on through the positions, like they all kind of have a
Okay.
cohort together.
Got it. Okay.
Anybody else?
Excuse me.
I will say, I don't know, I guess I'm the most senior member of the planning commission, which is hilarious. I recall a couple of years ago that we had an art gallery that was open at City Hall once, probably a quarter, or I think there were like 2 that I attended with council and with the art commission, and I think landmarks board was there. And that was really great way to kind of mingle and get to know what was going on in a really informal setting. I do think that that was, I mean, that's lost to COVID era, but that was really great to have a really informal setting where we could chat about, you know, other things that weren't, you know, part of an agenda. But I really like the idea that Commissioner Dodd shared about making something kind of regular. I will also say that having a liaison can sometimes be a big role for one person to take on in both directions too, right? So council has a lot of, each counselor has a lot of things that they're doing. And so adding more to their plate, more responsibility is, that's difficult. So I concur. Any other feedback about city relationship? All right.
That was very helpful. Thank you. And that's all I had, Mr. Chair.
All right. We'll move to reports from members. Are there any reports? I will say, I will say that yes, thank you everyone for attending that rainy Saturday. Thank you to staff for being prepared with a megaphone and with maps that were printed and laminated. That was just awesome. I think everybody learned a lot, and it was great to walk around the neighborhood see everybody in real life for the first time in several years. So that was just a really great experience, and I hope that we can kind of do more activities like that in the future. So that was really great. Thank you, everybody. And with that, let me check my schedule here. I think there's no further business. Oh, yes, Commissioner Dodd. Oh, and I see Commissioner Gustafson too. So after.
I was going to make the final motion that we do in these meetings. So if Commissioner Gustafson has a thing, that should go first.
Yes, actually, thank you, Commissioner Dodd. Sarah Gustafson here. I have a couple of points. First of all, echoing the praise to Chair Curd for the great talks. When my kids saw you on the Zoom today, they said, Karsten! So that was funny. You should have heard them say that. Second, I wanted to see if there was any update on the Capital Facilities Committee from the Planning Commission volunteers. And then third, the Fall 2021 Planning Magazine was awesome. And if anybody has dived into that magazine, there is a link to a study on how to design parks and public spaces with homeless people are in mind. And it was pretty provocative, and I might send it out to the commission. It was full of great articles. I'm going to stop talking about it now.
Yeah, I get a lot out of the the subscription to that magazine. So thank you to the city for providing that to commissioners. That's excellent. Yeah, okay.
If I could respond quickly to the question about the Capital Facilities Advisory Committee. So I'll check on that, Commissioner Gustafson. I know Dave forwarded the names from the last time to the, I believe, was it the city clerk's office? And I don't know what the schedule is. I know that they're still working on putting that together, but we'll get some information on that.
All right. Any other reports from members? All right. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion. Commissioner Dodd.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second to that motion?
I will second the motion.
Thank you. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I'm seeing unanimous consent. The meeting is now adjourned. It is 8:16, and our next meeting is February 2nd, I believe. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for a great evening, and see you in February.
Thanks, staff.
Everyone.
Thanks, commission
Thank you.
members.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
everybody.
Have a good night.
Bye.